People can hide behind charm, words, and even good intentions, but true character always reveals itself. The question is, do you know what to look for? Carl Jung, the legendary psychologist who uncovered the depths of the human psyche, believed that our real nature isn't in what we say, but in what we do, especially when no one's watching. He studied the hidden forces that drive behavior, the persona we show the world, the shadow we try to conceal, and the unconscious impulses that slip out when we least expect. So how do you see past the mask? Jung's work gives us clues. Today, we'll explore 5 revealing signs that expose someone's true character, traits most people miss, but once you notice them, you'll never unsee. Just 1. How they treat those who can do nothing for them. One of the most revealing ways to glimpse someone's true character is to watch how they treat those who can offer them nothing in return. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, the unconscious part of the personality that contains repressed weaknesses, desires, and instincts, often surfaces in moments where power dynamics are at play. When someone believes they are in a position of superiority, or when they think no one of importance is watching, their mask tends to slip. This is where the raw, unfiltered self emerges. A person who is kind, patient, and respectful only to those they deem influential, while dismissing, belittling, or ignoring those they consider beneath them, is betraying a carefully constructed persona rather than displaying genuine integrity. Jung would argue that this discrepancy reveals a fragmented self, one that hasn't integrated its shadow. The way someone speaks to a waiter, a cashier, or a subordinate isn't just a matter of politeness. It's a window into how they truly view others when they don't feel compelled to perform. Someone who is authentically secure and self-aware doesn't need to wield power over others to feel validated. Real-life examples of this dynamic are everywhere. Think of the executive who charms investors but snaps at an intern for a minor mistake, or the social media influencer who preaches kindness but treats customer service workers with condescension. These aren't just isolated moments of poor behavior. They're clues to an underlying lack of emotional maturity and self-awareness. Jung believed that until a person confronts and integrates their shadow, they will continue to project their insecurities onto those they perceive as weaker. This behavior also exposes a transactional view of relationships. If someone is only courteous to those who can advance their status, wealth, or social standing, their morality is conditional. In Jungian terms, this suggests an underdeveloped persona, one that prioritizes image over authenticity. By contrast, individuals who treat everyone with equal respect, regardless of their position, demonstrate a more integrated psyche. They aren't performing, they're acting from a place of wholeness. The next time you want to assess someone's true nature, don't just listen to what they say about themselves. Watch how they behave when they think it doesn't matter. That's when the real self steps forward. 2. Their reaction to stress or conflict. Stress and conflict serve as a litmus test for character, stripping away social niceties and revealing what lies beneath the surface. Carl Jung believed that in moments of crisis, the unconscious mind takes over, bypassing the carefully constructed persona we present to the world. When pressure mounts, suppressed emotions, unresolved traumas, and hidden aspects of the self surge forward, often in ways the individual doesn't even recognize. This is why some people who may seem calm and collected in ordinary circumstances suddenly become defensive, volatile, or even cruel when faced with adversity. Their reaction isn't just a response to the situation at hand, it's a glimpse into their psychological shadow. A person's instinctive behavior under stress tells you more about them than years of pleasant interactions ever could. Do they take responsibility? Or do they immediately shift blame onto others? Do they respond with aggression, passive aggression, or withdrawal? Or do they remain level-headed, addressing the issue without letting emotions override reason? Jung would argue that those who react with disproportionate anger or defensiveness are often grappling with unacknowledged insecurities or past wounds. Their outbursts are not really about the present conflict but about deeper, unprocessed pain that the situation has triggered. For example, someone who habitually lashes out at colleagues during high-pressure projects may be revealing an unconscious fear of inadequacy. Another who becomes icy and dismissive in arguments might be protecting themselves from vulnerability. Even those who play the victim, constantly framing themselves as the target of unfair treatment, are often exposing a shadow aspect that refuses to acknowledge personal agency. On the other hand, individuals who remain composed, who listen even when frustrated, and who seek solutions rather than scapegoats demonstrate a higher degree of self-awareness and emotional integration. They've likely done the inner work to recognize their triggers and manage their reactions. Jung's theory suggests that these stress responses are not random but patterned. They follow the grooves of deeply ingrained psychological habits. Someone who blames others is often resisting introspection, fearing what they might discover about themselves. Someone who becomes aggressive may be unconsciously reenacting dynamics from their past where powerlessness was met with rage. The key insight here is that how a person handles conflict isn't just a matter of temperament, it's a mirror reflecting their inner world. This is why observing someone in a crisis is so telling. The polished version of themselves falls away, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered truth of their character. If you want to know who someone really is, don't just watch them when things are easy. Watch them when things go wrong. That's when the mask slips and the shadow speaks. 3. What triggers their emotions? Few things reveal a person's hidden depths more clearly than what sparks their strongest emotional reactions, both positive and negative. Carl Jung's concept of projection explains why we often react intensely to traits in others that we've disowned in ourselves. When someone has an exaggerated response, whether rage, defensiveness, or even excessive admiration, it's often a sign that they're confronting something within their own psyche that remains unresolved. These emotional triggers don't just happen at random. They point directly to the shadow aspects of personality that a person hasn't fully acknowledged or integrated. Take criticism, for example. A person who becomes disproportionately angry or hurt by even mild feedback may be revealing a deep-seated insecurity they've buried. Jung would argue that their reaction isn't really about the comment itself but about the unconscious fear that the criticism might be true. Similarly, someone who takes immense pride in a particular trait, like always being the smartest or the most generous, might actually be overcompensating for a hidden sense of inadequacy in that very area. The more rigidly a person clings to an identity, the more likely it is that this identity is masking a shadow fear of its opposite. This dynamic becomes especially clear in close relationships, where emotional triggers are magnified. A person who accuses their partner of being controlling might, upon deeper reflection, be projecting their own unacknowledged desire for control. Someone who feels intense disgust toward a particular behavior in others may be wrestling with repressed impulses of their own. Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection, and it explains why we often harbor irrational dislikes or attractions toward certain people. They mirror back to us what we've refused to see in ourselves. Even positive triggers can be revealing. A person who idolizes someone, whether a mentor, celebrity, or romantic partner, might be projecting their own unlived potential onto that figure. Jung warned that idealization is just as much a projection as demonization. Both indicate that the individual is outsourcing qualities they haven't yet claimed for themselves. The stronger the emotional charge, the more likely it is that the reaction is about something internal rather than external. Recognizing these patterns in others and ourselves is the first step toward greater self-awareness. A person who can acknowledge their triggers without being ruled by them demonstrates emotional maturity and a willingness to engage with their shadow. In contrast, someone who consistently reacts with denial, deflection, or aggression when confronted with uncomfortable truths is likely still dominated by unconscious forces. Ultimately, emotional triggers are not flaws but clues, signposts pointing toward the parts of ourselves that need attention and integration. By paying attention to what provokes intense reactions in others, we gain insight into their hidden struggles. And by examining our own triggers, we begin the work of reclaiming our projections and achieving a more authentic, whole sense of self. As Jung famously said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The next time you witness an overreaction, whether in someone else or in the mirror, ask what unseen wound or disowned truth might be lurking beneath the surface. The answer may reveal far more than expected. For the stories they tell about themselves and others, the way people narrate their lives, the anecdotes they repeat, the roles they assign themselves, and how they describe others, offers profound insight into their level of self-awareness. Carl Jung recognized that personal mythology isn't just recollection, it's active soul work. Every repeated story, whether about triumph, betrayal, or identity, serves as a psychological fingerprint revealing how individuals perceive themselves and their place in the world. Those stuck in cycles of victimhood, for instance, aren't merely recounting misfortune, they're unconsciously reinforcing a self-concept built on powerlessness. Their selective memory becomes a cage, filtering every experience through the lens of persecution while omitting moments of agency. This isn't to dismiss genuine hardship, but to highlight how the stories we choose to tell either imprison or liberate us. Gossip functions similarly as a revelatory habit. When someone consistently focuses on judging others' flaws, misfortunes, or scandals, Jung would argue they're projecting disowned aspects of themselves. The coworker who relentlessly mocks a colleague's ambition might be suppressing their own professional envy. The friend who dissects everyone's failed relationships could be avoiding examination of their own relational patterns. What we criticize most vehemently in others often points to what we most fear in ourselves. Conversely, individuals who speak of others with nuance, acknowledging complexities without veering into condemnation or idealization, tend to demonstrate greater integration of their own shadow material. Grandiose narratives present another telling pattern. The person who constantly recounts their exceptional achievements, unique sufferings, or extraordinary connections often betrays an unspoken insecurity. Jung observed that inflation, the psychological state where one identifies too strongly with success or specialness, is as dangerous as inferiority complexes. Both stem from an unstable self-concept. For instance, the entrepreneur who can't converse without mentioning their brilliance may secretly dread being ordinary, while the artist who frames every setback as cosmic persecution might fear taking practical responsibility. These aren't just personality quirks, they're defense mechanisms against confronting the full, messy spectrum of human experience. Healthy self-narration shows flexibility. People with strong self-awareness update their stories as they grow. They can laugh at past versions of themselves, acknowledge their own contradictions, and describe conflicts without casting themselves as either hero or victim. You'll notice their anecdotes have texture, moments of humility alongside pride, recognition of both their agency and their limitations. This reflects what Jung termed individuation, the lifelong process of integrating disparate parts of the psyche into a cohesive whole. In contrast, rigid storytelling should give pause. Whether it's the perpetual martyr who recounts every interaction as betrayal, the narcissist whose tales always position them as the exceptional center, or the cynic who frames all human behavior as self-interested, these fixed narratives reveal psychological stagnation. They signal someone either unwilling or unable to examine their own shadow. The most authentic individuals don't need to construct airtight personal mythologies. Their stories breathe, change, and occasionally contradict, because they're not being used as fortifications against truth. Pay attention not just to what people say about their lives, but how they say it. The emotional charge around certain memories, the details they emphasize or omit, and whether they allow others to have differing perspectives, all serve as diagnostic tools for character. Someone who can discuss failures with humor, acknowledge others' viewpoints without feeling threatened, and resist reducing complex experiences to simplistic morals likely possesses the self-awareness Jung considered essential for psychological maturity. Their stories aren't performances, they're ongoing conversations with the self. Ultimately, the tales we rehearse shape who we become. They either keep us circling the same psychological territory or guide us toward new inner landscapes. As Jung noted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The stories people tell are more than entertainment, they're living maps to the soul's hidden terrain, if only we learn to read them wisely. 5. Their relationship with their shadow self. The most telling indicator of someone's character lies not in the virtues they proudly display, but in how they relate to the parts of themselves they try to hide. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self represents all that we deny, suppress, or find unacceptable within our own psyche, our hidden jealousies, buried angers, secret desires, and unacknowledged weaknesses. How a person engages with this shadow territory reveals more about their true nature than any carefully curated persona ever could. Those who angrily reject any suggestion of imperfection, who become defensive at the slightest criticism, or who project their flaws onto others with striking intensity demonstrate what happens when the shadow remains completely unconscious. Their vehement denials often betray precisely what they're trying to conceal. A person's capacity for honest self-reflection serves as the litmus test for shadow integration. When confronted with uncomfortable truths, do they pause and consider, or do they immediately counterattack? The difference between these responses marks the divide between psychological maturity and emotional fragility. Someone who can say, "You're right, I need to work on that," demonstrates a healthy relationship with their shadow. They recognize these darker aspects exist without being controlled by them. In contrast, those who respond to feedback with rage, deflection, or elaborate justifications show how the unexamined shadow operates autonomously, hijacking their behavior whenever its territory is threatened. This explains why some individuals can become disproportionately angry over minor slights. The intensity of their reaction points to a much deeper wound they've refused to acknowledge. The shadow also manifests in what Jung called projection, attributing our own disliked qualities to others. The coworker who constantly accuses colleagues of laziness may be struggling with their own productivity issues. The partner who obsessively suspects infidelity might be wrestling with their own repressed desires. These projections aren't random. They follow precise psychological patterns. The traits that irritate us most in others often mirror what we've disowned in ourselves. This mechanism explains why some people develop intense, irrational dislikes. They're essentially seeing their own reflection and recoiling from it. The more vehement the reaction, the more likely it is that the perceived flaw touches on something deeply buried within their own psyche. Spiritual bypassing presents another common shadow avoidance tactic, using lofty ideals or intellectualization to dodge uncomfortable emotions. The person who speaks constantly about enlightenment but can't handle basic criticism, or the activist who preaches compassion yet shows none to those who disagree, demonstrates how the shadow operates in supposedly evolved individuals. Even positive traits, when taken to extremes, can reveal shadow material. Excessive niceness often conceals repressed anger, while rigid moralism frequently hides unacknowledged desires. Jung warned that the brighter the persona, the darker the shadow it conceals, a truth evident in the many public figures whose carefully crafted images eventually crumble under the weight of their denied realities. The path to shadow integration begins with simple but courageous honesty, the willingness to say, "That's part of me too." This doesn't mean indulging every dark impulse, but rather acknowledging these aspects exist so they can be consciously managed rather than unconsciously expressed. People who've done this work carry themselves differently. They don't need constant validation because they're not at war with themselves. They can admit mistakes because their self-worth isn't tied to perfection. They recognize their complexity, capable of both kindness and cruelty, generosity and selfishness, without letting any single aspect define them. This hard-won self-awareness creates an authenticity that no persona could ever replicate. Ultimately, the shadow isn't our enemy but an untapped source of wholeness. Those who make peace with their darker aspects gain access to tremendous energy previously wasted on repression and denial. They become more compassionate toward others' flaws because they've faced their own. They respond rather than react because they're not constantly defending against internal threats. In this light, shadow work emerges not as psychological housekeeping, but as the foundation of genuine character. As Jung observed, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The people we instinctively trust aren't those without shadows, but those who've stopped running from them. Their strength comes not from perfection, but from the courage to embrace their full humanity, light and dark together. Observing these Jungian indicators of character isn't about creating a checklist to judge or categorize people. It's about developing a more nuanced, compassionate understanding of human behavior. The true value of this awareness lies not in spotting others' flaws, but in recognizing how unconscious patterns drive all of us, yourself included. When you notice someone reacting defensively to stress or projecting their shadow onto others, the most useful question isn't, "What's wrong with them?" but "What might this reveal about their inner world?" This shift from judgment to curiosity creates space for more authentic connections. People sense when they're being analyzed versus understood, and the difference determines whether your insights build bridges or walls. The art lies in using this knowledge to navigate relationships wisely while resisting the temptation to weaponize psychology as a tool for superiority. Developing this discernment requires balancing awareness with acceptance. You might observe that a colleague consistently takes credit for others' ideas, a classic shadow manifestation of their own insecurity about competence. The practical application isn't confronting them about their unintegrated shadow, but adjusting how you collaborate with them while maintaining compassion for their struggle. Similarly, when a friend falls into perpetual victim narratives, recognizing this pattern helps you set boundaries against emotional draining without writing them off as hopeless. The most psychologically astute people don't use their knowledge to dismiss others, but to interact more effectively while honoring everyone's complex humanity, including their own blind spots. Self-awareness becomes the cornerstone for applying these insights constructively. The moment you find yourself mentally cataloging someone else's psychological flaws is precisely when to turn the lens inward. Jungian principles remind us that what irritates us in others often reflects what we haven't reconciled in ourselves. That coworker whose arrogance grates on you? Your reaction may point to your own unacknowledged shame about professional inadequacy. The partner whose emotional neediness feels suffocating? Perhaps it mirrors your discomfort with your own dependency longings. This isn't to suggest all criticisms are projections, but that our strongest reactions always warrant self-examination first. The most transformative relationships occur when both parties use these friction points as mirrors rather than weapons. In romantic partnerships, this awareness prevents the common trap of mistaking projection for love. The initial rush of attraction often involves projecting our ideal self or desired qualities onto another person, what Jung called the anima/animus dynamic. The practical application comes in recognizing when infatuation gives way to reality and using that transition as an opportunity for mutual growth rather than disappointment. Partners who understand psychological patterns can catch themselves when they start demanding their significant other fulfill some idealized role and instead appreciate them as a whole, flawed human. This creates space for what Jung called the alchemical marriage, a relationship where both individuals consciously work through their projections to achieve deeper connection. Parent-child relationships particularly benefit from this shadow-aware approach. Children unconsciously act out their parents' disowned qualities. The perfectionist parent often raises a messy child, the emotionally restrained parent a dramatic one. Recognizing these dynamics allows parents to respond with guidance rather than suppression, understanding that the child's difficult traits may represent split-off parts of themselves. This generational shadow work can break cycles of projection and repression that otherwise repeat indefinitely. Families become laboratories for psychological integration when members stop demanding others carry their unconscious baggage. Professional environments equally transform when leaders understand these principles. A manager aware of power dynamics and shadow projections can create cultures where employees feel seen rather than manipulated. They recognize when workplace conflicts stem from clashing unconscious patterns rather than surface disagreements. Team members learn to give feedback in ways that minimize defensive reactions and receive criticism without ego collapse. The most effective leaders aren't those without shadows, but those who've learned to work with them consciously, creating organizations where psychological awareness enhances rather than hinders performance. The ultimate value of this perspective lies in its power to deepen all human connections while maintaining healthy boundaries. When you understand that the rude stranger may be acting out unconscious pain, you can respond with detached compassion rather than taking it personally. When you recognize a friend's boastfulness as insecurity rather than arrogance, you can appreciate their underlying worth without endorsing the defensive behavior. This approach fosters relationships based in reality rather than fantasy, where people are loved for who they actually are rather than who we need them to be. True psychological sophistication always circles back to humility. The more you learn about these patterns, the more you recognize them in yourself first. This creates a ripple effect. As you become more accepting of your own contradictions, you naturally extend that understanding to others. Relationships become spaces for mutual growth rather than mutual judgment. You start seeing difficult people not as nuisances, but as unconscious teachers highlighting areas where you still need integration. In this way, Jung's insights transform from abstract theories into living tools for creating more authentic connections, the kind that nourish rather than deplete, that reveal rather than conceal, and that ultimately help all involved become more fully human. The practical application of this knowledge isn't about diagnosing everyone you meet, but about developing what Jung called a psychological attitude, a way of moving through the world that balances clear-eyed perception with deep compassion. It's recognizing that beneath all our personas, we're all wrestling with similar human struggles in different disguises. When you can simultaneously see people's shadows and their light, their defenses and their potential, you hold the key to relationships that transform rather than transact. This is the real power of psychological awareness. Not to separate yourself from others through superior understanding, but to find the common humanity beneath all the surface noise. In a world full of people acting out their unconscious patterns, becoming someone who does so less is perhaps the most valuable relationship skill of all. We've journeyed through 5 powerful lenses to see beyond the surface of human behavior, each rooted in Carl Jung's timeless wisdom. Remember, true character reveals itself in how someone treats those who can't benefit them, how they handle stress when their mask slips, what triggers their strongest emotions, the stories they repeat about themselves and others, and most tellingly, how they engage with their own shadow. These aren't just observations, but invitations to witness the unconscious patterns that drive us all. Now we turn the mirror to you. Which of these signs have you recognized in people around you, or caught glimpses of in your own reactions? The most profound insights often come when we spot these patterns within ourselves. Share your experiences in the comments below. Let's create a conversation about the fascinating, often hidden dimensions of human nature. If this exploration of psychology's depths resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing. We'll continue decoding the unconscious forces that shape behavior, relationships, and personal growth. After all, as Jung reminds us, the most transformative journey isn't outward, but inward, into the uncharted territory of our own psyche. Press that notification bell so we can keep exploring together. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep observing the extraordinary in the ordinary.